My name is Sultan. I got into blockchain probably about 4 or 5 years ago. We initially tried to mount an oil-backed token. So the idea was that you could move oil around without actually moving oil around, similar to how you use rupees to move the value of a rupee around without actually moving things. That didn't work. And so I spent a couple years doing a bunch of big data work. About 2.5, 3 years ago, I did a bunch of research into the blockchain and terrorism. And I've published in the United States Army Cyber Defense Review on how you can, understand ISIS and disrupt them. And I started touching on kind of the blockchain pieces. I'll be doing a follow-up this fall, which is also research-based. And during that period of time, I've done a couple of things. I've started working with and helping ICOs get funded. I've done a bunch of technical advisory. We built a company called NIO. It's NIO.net. And we basically help from, conceptualization through white paper, tokenomics, and building the tech. And then I belong to, or am a member of a fund called Tario Capital. And what we do is we take ICOs and roadshows and help get them funded. A lot of the idea of working with two different companies inside of this is, a lot of ICOs have spent all of their money raising money and literally burned it, or they haven't actually hired the right tech teams because, for every 8 job openings inside of this industry, there's about 1 applicant that's actually qualified. So what we try to do is we try to build things or work with people to build things so that you can eventually take the training wheels off and they can ride it by themselves. So that you don't have egregious, expense, egregious loss, and you actually end up with finished products. And so that's really kind of, where I am in the space. I'm trying to educate people, trying to evangelize, and trying to demystify a lot of this stuff. You've got a pretty large hackathon with a pretty diverse group. I mean, crypto gets a lot of shade for saying that there's no women involved, but I think there's a fair representation here, at least about 20%. At the same token, the panels have been good. I think there's a tremendous amount of ground to cover here inside of 2 days. We covered regulatory issues. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about kind of use cases of blockchain applicability to India, and I think it's good now, and I think it's going to get better. Speaker I'm looking forward for. My co-panelists were pretty great. Some of the government officials were really good. Minister of IT, I believe, is tomorrow. That'll be interesting. What's really going to be, kind of curious is to see how Telangana looks at not just the blockchain, right? So the blockchain is just, it's a concept. It's how do we eliminate the middlemen and how do we make transactions more authenticated over the course of time. But you've also got, smart contracts and a variety of other technologies that have really kind of come to bear inside of this. And you'll have the ability to tokenize or, digitize assets. You'll have the ability to make things that couldn't be found before findable. Maybe you'll have a way to federate all this data in what used to be Andhra Pradesh. I've spoken at a number of conferences, World Blockchain Forum, D10E, that sort of thing. I think this is unique in the sense that it's targeting India in a way India hasn't been targeted before. If you think about this, I've seen folks, Praneet, who runs one of the global forums, I've seen them overseas, and QuickX, which is a company I advise, who's actually here today. I've seen them overseas, but it's not the type of thing where you get this sort of, nexus of daisies together in one place, where they're actually talking about not just issues related to the blockchain, but issues that are kind of endemic to India specifically. You've got MiFi, which is focusing on how do you roll out healthcare to these provincial villages that you have that are oftentimes hard to get to, where there are no doctors. You've got QuickX, which is kind of a great protocol for payment and loading crypto on there. They're trying to figure out, how do we get people to use crypto without the complexity of traditional wallets? And then, you know, some of the bigger players, Binance, those folks are here. But I think there's a lot of interesting ideas as well. And, you know, that's the kind of stuff that sets the stage for the building of kind of a bigger community, a broader community. And I think that's something that India needs to build and get into. At large, you're eliminating a lot of middlemen, which basically means that, you know, the banks, money lenders, anyone who really just didn't need to exist because they just provide a service in between two other people and they're not adding a lot of value, can potentially be disrupted and removed inside of the next 10 to 20 years. So what you'll see is a lot of these traditional, you know, folks that had basically provided one of those roles may not exist anymore. You may not, you know, 15 years from now, you may not even have to use an app or a bank to get a mortgage. You may be getting a mortgage that's based upon Bitcoin or EOS or something else. So I think that kind of disruption from the notion of what is a traditional business, or what has been a traditional business for the past couple hundred years, into these new technology businesses is one. Two is the concept of money, right? So money we now understand is paper or coin or something that's tangible. We're now moving into the opportunity to have fully digitalized currencies, and those currencies will be impacting things in two ways. One is, you know, how we pay and how we utilize them. But two is we're creating new derivative products, and we're creating new economic products. So exchanges, the way that you trade, the way that you buy things, all of that changes together. And the third thing I think that's going to come to, you know, you're probably what, about 22?
Yes.
Okay, so your generation, so you're globally what's known as Gen Z, right? I'm Gen X. And, you know, we were kind of like the first disruptors, and there's millennials in between both of our generations. But your generation is the receiver of all of this technology, and you're going to be the first ones to live through it. And your kids, who have all sorts of different names based upon whether they exist or not now, but, you know, basically everyone that's born 2005 forward and everyone who'll be born 2020 forward, like those two generations, they're going to be growing up in a world that's going to be almost, you know, 25-35% cryptoized and then fully cryptoized. And you have to think about this. Where we are right now is really an interesting time in history. We have the ability where we're creating digital currency and digital financial products like 1922. We have the ability to create hedge funds like 1974. We've got the technical velocity of like 2000, right? Remember the first dot-com boom? Maybe you don't. And then on top of that, we've got all of the impact of social media inside of this. So it's like 4 different things happening at once, and happening at a velocity that's intense. You know, a lot of my friends say that 3 weeks in crypto is like a year everywhere else, and I think that's reasonably accurate, because we used to say 3 months in social was like a year. And inside of 3 weeks, you know, one government can change their perspective on crypto. I mean, you know, India's trying to put together a act right now that's really kind of focused on how do we kind of structure data better, how do we prevent fraud and those types of things. And that, I think, is going to have long-ranging impacts. But the beauty of that is that you can use blockchain or smart contract technology for that to at least facilitate the implementation thereof. But I think it really kind of comes to what I talked about on my panel, which is the cultural shift. You know, like, what if tomorrow you couldn't spend paper rupees? What if everything had to be a digital transaction? Like, how easy would that be for you? For your generation, probably super easy. My generation, fairly easy, but, you know, your parents and your grandparents and that sort of thing, maybe not, right? And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about cultural shifts that reside alongside technological shifts that are impacting not just the way that we deal with day-to-day things, but money, like all of that. And that's what I think is going to be kind of intense in India, because if India gets this one right, I mean, they could catapult themselves ahead of China. You know, in the United States, we're about to get ETF, blockchain or Bitcoin ETF funds. And so what that means is, if you look at foreign exchange, like in India, it's a little bit different because you have a central regulatory body that only allows certain types of transactions to happen. If you look at Europe and you look at everywhere else, though, foreign exchange happens on a variety of different currencies, and there's a lot of traders out there. That type of implication is going to start happening inside of crypto, and it potentially could happen here. You've got new exchanges, that are ramping up. So I think you're going to see a proliferation of crypto coming into India. Third, India's interesting in the sense that people will spend a lot of money to get things done, but people still expect things for free. And I think that attitude might change a little bit, because what we're trying to do with the blockchain is put value on things that, were previously not understood as value. Like, there could be an intrinsic value to taking a rickshaw versus taking a car. There could be an intrinsic value to purchasing from a local farmer versus purchasing from, some shopping center. All of these things can be part and parcel of what becomes the cultural changes of the new next India. But, it also goes to provenance of things, like, is this eggplant that I bought an actual eggplant, or is it something that was spray painted, right? It could impact things like garbage collection and disposal, the reutilization of plastic products or the recycling thereof, and wide sweeping change across just the way that we interact with other people. And that, I think, is the most significant thing, because if you look at, there was a tech initiative for 90,000 villages in India. And the whole idea was like, well, let's go get them Wi-Fi and a variety of other things that they just don't have. Now, think about what if you can take community lending there. Okay, so community lending for like you and me might be like, oh, I need to borrow 5,000 or 10,000, 50,000 bucks. Community lending there is like, I need to borrow 10 bucks. I need to borrow 100 bucks for things. But the only person that they can typically go to is the money lender. And the money lender is some gunda that's, gonna try and like hold their baby over a fire if they don't pay him back. All of that could go away. And those type of wide sweeping cultural changes, that's significant. Going to take India culturally adapting and saying that this is going to be something we do. The same way that you guys took in ISO 9001 and CMM and, everything else and made it part and parcel of the culture. But what's different here is that entrepreneurial spirit, which is very, much India, is now going to have to shift a little bit, because you're building things that could also be financial products, that could also be traded on a global scale, that could also increase in value. And that's not something we've ever dealt with in America and India and anywhere else. I'd like to see more family offices here. It's a panel after mine. They asked how many angel investors are here, and there's like 2 people raised their hands. So I'd like to see family offices and venture capitalists, and I'd like to see some angel investors, because you got to put money into your own systems. 2 is I'd like to see applications for smart contracts inside of industry. The provenance of drugs, the provenance of food, do you know where something came from? Is this fraudulent? You think back to issues that, because my mom comes from this area, my dad comes from somewhere else. But, you remember this stuff, people talking about like thinning buttermilk or like thinning drugs and that kind of stuff. That stuff has to stop. You guys are 1.2 billion people now, and you need a higher standard for everything. And that's just going to continue to need to increase as, I don't know what direction India is going to take, but I can tell you the population is still going to continue to grow. And I can tell you that, you know, there's going to be a necessity for people to understand how they can better themselves and better society. And I think on the one side, you know, the economic opportunity of blockchain presents that, like how do we make everything better? On the opposite side, it's altruistic, right? How do we affect social good? So maybe that's the last thing. The next IBC conference, you know, good money's here. Maybe we have a little bit more of that. Because at the end of the day, you know, what exactly are we doing if we're coining all this money if we're not really helping people?